At 2 p.m. on Veterans Day, my son stood at the microphone in the county veterans hall, held up my dress blue jacket, and told 200 people I had been wearing medals that belonged to my dead husband. He did not sound angry. He sounded prepared. He had that careful, gentle tone people use when they want cruelty to look like concern. The mayor sat near the front. The post commander sat beneath the American flag. 3 local reporters stood against the back wall with cameras tucked under their arms. My husband's portrait was on an easel beside the stage, and my place card had been moved from the family table to a folding chair near the kitchen doors. Then my son said, "Mom has been confused since Dad died. We are trying to protect her dignity." Forks stopped moving. A chair creaked. Someone whispered my name and then went quiet. The post commander lowered his eyes, but he did not interrupt. That silence hurt more than laughter would have. My granddaughter Lily sat at the front table in a navy dress, her hands folded in her lap, watching her father decide which version of me she was allowed to inherit. What Evan did not know was that the certified service record he had tried to hide was already inside my black purse, wrapped in a manila envelope with a raised seal. He did not know the retired master sergeant whose life I had helped save was sitting 2 tables behind him. He did not know that inside the lining of the very jacket he was holding, my husband had left a microcassette with one final message. Evan had the microphone. I had the record. He had the printed program. I had the orders, the citation, the witness, and my husband's voice. Before the night ended, the same room that avoided my eyes would have to hear my name corrected into that microphone. To understand why my own son believed he could erase me in a room built for honor, you have to understand how slowly a woman can be edited out of her own story. My name is Helen Whitaker. I was 63 years old that November, a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Air Force Reserve Nurse Corps. Though most people in my town knew me only as Tom Whitaker's widow. That was not an insult, not at first. Tom had been a good man, a decorated helicopter pilot, a father who taught our son how to change oil and bait a hook, and a husband who used to bring me coffee before dawn when I came home from 12-hour hospital shifts. We had been married 37 years when cancer took him. He died in the small downstairs bedroom of our house outside Marietta, Georgia, with the quilt my mother made pulled up to his chest and one hand resting over mine. He did not leave suddenly. That was the mercy and the cruelty of it. We had time to say things, time to apologize for little failures, time to sort medicine bottles, funeral papers, and old photographs. We also had time to learn which people showed up when showing up was inconvenient. Our son Evan showed up in the beginning. I will give him that much. He drove Tom to appointments twice. He repaired the loose rail on the back steps. He brought Lily over with a little basket of oranges and a handmade card that said, "Grandpa, you are brave." I still have that card in a cedar box in my closet. But as Tom grew weaker, Evan grew more restless. He could not sit long in a room where death moved slowly. He preferred action, errands, paperwork, phone calls in the hallway. He would say things like, "Mom, let me handle the practical side," as if I had not spent 28 years handling field hospitals, evacuation plans, medication schedules, and frightened young airmen who called me ma'am with blood on their sleeves. I understood him then. Or I thought I did. Adult children do not always know how to look at a dying parent. Sometimes they become bossy because grief makes them feel small. So I let Evan talk to the insurance company. I let him order extra copies of the death certificate. I let him sit with the funeral director while I chose hymns and stared at a wall of urns I was not ready to see. That was my first mistake. Not because a son should not help his mother, but because I let help become authority. I confused his confidence with care. Tom's funeral was held at First Baptist on a rainy Thursday in April. The sanctuary smelled of lilies and wet wool. Men from the local Veterans Council stood along the aisle in dark suits. The honor guard folded the flag with quiet precision, each crease sharp enough to cut the air. When the bugle sounded, I did not cry. I could not. Some grief is too large to come out through tears. After the service, people lined up to shake my hand. They told me what Tom had meant to them. They talked about his flying, his calm voice, his stubborn patriotism, the time he landed a damaged aircraft, and later claimed he had only been trying not to miss supper. No one meant harm, but after the 20th person said, "You must have been so proud to stand beside him," something small inside me tightened. Beside him. I had stood beside him. I had also stood in my own uniform. I had held rank. I had served overseas. I had missed Christmas mornings and school plays because the Air Force needed nurses in places where young bodies arrived broken and scared. But that day was Tom's day, and I was not going to correct mourners at my husband's funeral. Evan heard it all. He watched the town place Tom on a pedestal and me at the base of it. I do not think he planned anything then. Lies do not always begin as plots. Sometimes they begin as a convenient shape everyone keeps stepping into. In the months after the funeral, Evan came by the house often. He was 41, a real estate broker with expensive shoes and a talent for saying complicated things as if only he understood them. His wife, Claire, had the polished manners of a woman who never raised her voice because she had discovered a quieter way to get what she wanted. She called me mom in public and Helen in private. She corrected my grocery choices, my curtains, my driving, and eventually my memory. "You already told us that story," she would say with a smile if I mentioned a deployment or a hospital shift from years before. "That's all right. We all repeat ourselves as we get older." The first time she said it, I laughed because I thought she was teasing. The second time, I looked at her. By the third time, Evan began glancing at me with concern that felt rehearsed. It started small. At church, Claire would take my elbow when there were 3 steps, though I did not need help. At family dinners, Evan would answer questions directed at me. When someone asked whether I still volunteered at the VA clinic, he said, "Mom's cutting back, she gets tired." I had not cut back. I was there every Tuesday morning, checking blood pressure, helping older veterans fill out forms, and listening to men who still carried wars in their shoulders. When Lily asked about my medals, Claire interrupted before I could answer. "Those are mostly Grandpa's things, honey. Grandma keeps them safe." Mostly. It was one word. Small enough to deny, large enough to plant doubt. Tom and I had kept our service items together in the den. His flight helmet, photographs, ribbons, and framed citations hung on the left wall. Mine were on the right. We used to joke that our den looked like a recruiting office with better curtains. After he died, Evan offered to help me organize everything. "That story deserves a proper display," he said. "So does mine," I answered. He looked startled, then smiled too quickly. Of course, that's what I meant. But that was not what he meant. In July, Evan announced he wanted to create the Thomas Whitaker Memorial Scholarship for students from military families. I loved the idea. Tom had believed in education, especially for children who had moved from base to base and learned too early how to say goodbye. Evan said the scholarship would honor service, sacrifice, and family. The first meeting was held around my dining room table. Claire brought a laptop, Evan brought folders. I made coffee in the blue enamel pot Tom had bought during a road trip through Alabama. Lily colored quietly at the far end of the table. "We need a board," Evan said, "just for appearances and accountability." I nodded. That makes sense. "I'll serve as president, Claire can handle communications, and you can be honorary chair." Honorary. There are words people use when they want you visible but not powerful. "I would rather be a voting member," I said. Evan shifted in his chair. Claire's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Mom," he said gently, "you have enough on your plate." "I have time." "It's not about time. It's about stress. You've been through a lot." I looked at my son across the table and saw Tom's jawline, my father's brown eyes, and something else I could not name yet. "I can read bylaws, Evan." Claire smiled. "No one said you couldn't." Lily looked up from her coloring page. Grandma was a nurse in the Air Force. I smiled at her. "That's right." Evan closed his folder. "We all know that, sweetheart." But his tone said, "Not now." I let the matter drop that evening because Lily was there. That became a pattern. I stayed quiet because Lily was there. I changed the subject because Lily was there. I swallowed things I should have answered because I did not want my granddaughter's memories of me filled with adult attention. Silence can be love. It can also become a cage. By August, the scholarship had a website. The front page showed Tom in uniform, smiling beside a helicopter in 1989. Below the photo were the words, "A lifetime of courage." I cried when I saw it. Then I scrolled down and found a paragraph about family. Thomas Whitaker was supported throughout his years of service by his devoted wife, Helen, who faithfully kept the home fires burning. I stared at that sentence for a long time. It was not false exactly, but it was incomplete in a way that felt deliberate. I had kept the home fires burning. I had also worked emergency rooms, deployed with aeromedical teams, worn a flight suit under a desert sun, and signed my name to patient records in tents that shook from distant blasts. I called Evan. "Can we revise the biography?" I asked. "What's wrong with it?" "It makes me sound like I never served." There was a pause. Then he sighed. "Mom, the scholarship is about Dad." "I know that." "Then why are you making this about you?" I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, watching a cardinal hop along the fence outside the window. I remember that bird because it seemed so bright against the gray afternoon. "I am not making it about me," I said. "I am asking not to be erased." "No one is erasing you." But once a person says that too quickly, you begin to understand they have already started. After that call, I went upstairs to the cedar closet where I kept my service binder. It was thick, dark blue, with tabbed sections I had labeled years before in black marker: orders, evaluations, awards, retirement, medical, correspondence. Tom used to tease me for keeping everything. You could prove what you ate for lunch in 1997, he would say. Only if lunch was reimbursable, I would answer. Inside the front pocket was a certified copy of my DD Form 214, issued when I retired. There were retirement orders, promotion orders, copies of my officer performance reports, and the citation for the air medal I received for meritorious achievement during aeromedical evacuation operations. I ran my fingers over the raised seal on one certificate and felt foolish for needing comfort from paper. Then I found a yellow sticky note in Tom's handwriting, tucked behind the sleeve that held my retirement ceremony photograph. Don't let them turn you into my shadow. I sat on the closet floor and cried then. Not loudly, not beautifully, just like an old house, finally letting rain through the roof. Tom had written that note 3 months before he died. I remembered the day. He had been too weak to climb the stairs, so he asked me to bring down the binder. We spent an hour looking through old photographs. In one, I was standing beside a C-130, hair tucked under my cap, face thinner than I remembered, eyes tired but clear. Tom held the photo and smiled. You never did like making speeches, he said. I liked doing the work. That's why people like Evan forget the work happened. Evan knows I served. Tom looked at me with the blunt tenderness of a man who knew he was running out of time. Knowing and honoring are not the same thing. At the time, I told him not to worry. I said Evan was grieving, Claire was trying to help, and nobody meant harm. Tom closed the binder and rested his hand on the cover. Helen, I flew aircraft. You carried people home. Don't let anybody rank grief above truth. I remembered those words in the closet, with the sticky note in my hand. Then I put the binder back, because old habits are stubborn. I told myself the website did not matter. The scholarship was good. Tom's name would help young people. I could bear an imperfect sentence. That is how erasure works. It asks for only one sentence at a time. In September, Evan asked for Tom's dress uniform jacket. He wanted it for the scholarship launch dinner on Veterans Day. I'm building a small display, he said. Dad's medals, his folded flag, a few photographs. That's fine, I said. I'll bring them myself. His voice tightened. It would be easier if I stored everything at my house until the event. No. The word came out firmer than I expected. On the other end of the phone, Evan was silent. Mom, why are you making this difficult? Because your father's things are not props. They're not props. They're part of his legacy. So am I. He laughed once, not kindly. Nobody said you weren't. A week later, Claire came by with Lily. She brought banana bread wrapped in foil and that bright smile she used when she had arrived with a purpose. Lily ran to the backyard to look for the orange cat that sometimes slept under my hydrangeas. Claire stayed in the den. She looked at the 2 walls of service memorabilia. Tom on the left, me on the right. It's a lot, she said. It's our life. I know. I just wonder if it might be confusing for guests at the dinner. What would be confusing? She tilted her head. People may not understand which items belong to Tom and which belong to you. They have name tags. I mean the bigger picture. I waited. Claire smoothed her hair behind one ear. Evan is worried people will think the scholarship is trying to honor 2 military careers instead of his father's. It could honor both without taking anything from Tom. But the donors responded to Tom's story. There it was, donors. I looked at my daughter-in-law, really looked at her. The diamond on her left hand caught the afternoon light. Her purse was a designer brand I recognized because she had once told me how much it costs while pretending not to. Evan's real estate business had slowed that year. Interest rates were high, deals were falling through, and he had begun speaking about the scholarship, not only as a tribute, but as an opportunity. There are grants, he had told me, corporate sponsorships, events. A foundation can grow if you handle it right. I had ignored the phrase, handle it right. Now I understood that Tom's heroism had become useful. Mine had become inconvenient. Claire, I said quietly, what exactly are you asking me to remove? She looked relieved, as if we had finally reached the practical part. Not remove. Maybe just separate. For now, my wall. Your display, my service, she sighed. This is why Evan worries. You take everything as an attack. No, Claire. I take attacks as attacks. Her face cooled. She left. 15 minutes later, taking the banana bread with her, That evening, I found Lily's drawing on the den carpet. She had drawn two stick figures in uniforms, one tall and one short, both wearing hats. Above them, she had written Grandpa and Grandma fly helping people. I folded it carefully and put it in the service binder. By October, the small cuts became public. At church, the bulletin announced the upcoming Veterans Day dinner and the Thomas Whitaker Memorial Scholarship launch. It named Evan as founder and Claire as event chair. It named me as Tom's beloved widow, not retired lieutenant colonel, not Air Force nurse, not co-custodian of the family records, just widow. After the service, Pastor Wilkes found me near the coffee urn. He was a kind man, but kindness does not always make a person brave. Helen, he said, Evan mentioned you might be feeling sensitive about some of the language. Did he? He's concerned about your stress. I looked across the fellowship hall. Evan stood near the doorway, shaking hands with donors, smiling like a mayor in training. Claire stood beside him, one hand on his arm. What did he tell you? I asked. Pastor Wilkes lowered his voice. Only that grief can make memory a little tender. Tender. It was such a soft word for a knife. I could have opened my purse right there and shown him my retired military identification card. I could have reminded him that he had attended the ceremony when the county thanked women veterans and that I had been one of the speakers. I could have corrected the whole thing over weak coffee and donuts. But something stopped me. It was not fear, it was recognition. Evan was not misunderstanding me anymore. He was building a record. Concerned son, grieving widow, confused older woman. Every gentle phrase was a brick. That Monday, I called an attorney named Marion Brooks. Marion had been a JAG officer years before, opening a small practice near Kennesaw. We had met through the VA clinic. She was blunt, silver-haired, and so punctual that arriving 5 minutes early felt late around her. I sat in her office with my service binder on my lap. After I finished explaining, she asked one question. What does your son want? I blinked. To honor his father. That is what he says. What does he want? I looked down at my hands. The answer embarrassed me because it had been visible for weeks. Evan wanted control of Tom's story, control of the scholarship, control of the donor money, control of the family narrative, and maybe, eventually, control of my house. He wants me manageable, I said. Marion nodded once, then stopped trying to be understood and start documenting. That sentence changed everything. She reviewed the scholarship paperwork, the website, the emails, the church bulletin, and several text messages from Evan. She pointed to phrases I had brushed aside. Mom's memory is unreliable. Mom gets emotional about service details. We may need to protect Dad's items from being mixed up. The board should limit Helen's role until she stabilizes. I felt cold reading those words in a row. One sentence alone could be explained. Together, they became a pattern. Marion leaned back. He's not only excluding you, he is preparing other people to believe you cannot accurately identify your own military property. Why would he go that far? Because if you protest later, he wants your protest discounted before you make it. I stared at the binder. She continued, Do you still have the original jacket he asked about? Yes. Bring it next time. I did. My dress blue jacket hung in a garment bag at the back of my closet. I had not worn it since my retirement ceremony. It still smelled faintly of wool, cedar, and the lavender sachet my mother used to tuck into storage boxes. On the shoulders were my silver oak leaves, Lieutenant Colonel. My ribbons were mounted correctly. My name tag read Whitaker. When I placed it on Marion's conference table, she studied it without touching. Beautiful, she said. It feels like another life. No, it's the same life. Some people just prefer the chapters where you served them. She photographed the jacket, the insignia, the name tag, the ribbon rack, and the tailoring label inside. Then she asked me whether anyone else had access to the den. Evan has a key, I said. She looked up. I gave it to him after Tom died. Changed the locks. He's my son. Helen, Marion's voice softened, which somehow made it firmer. Your son is already using public concern to separate you from your own record. Change the locks. I did not change them that day. That was my real flaw. I had discipline in uniform, but at home I kept mistaking delay for mercy. I wanted to leave Evan a door back to decency. I wanted to believe the boy who once brought me dandelions in a plastic cup was still somewhere inside the man who spoke about board control and donor optics. Maybe he was, but goodness buried under ambition cannot protect you unless it is willing to stand up. 2 nights later, I came home from the grocery store and knew something was wrong before I reached the porch. The house was too still. That sounds foolish, but homes have a way of announcing disturbance. The lamp in the den was on, though I had left it off. The closet door upstairs was open. The cedar smell was stronger than usual. My service binder was gone. For a full minute, I simply stood in the closet doorway holding a grocery bag with a carton of eggs inside. Then I set the bag down carefully because my hands had begun to shake. The garment bag with my dress blue jacket was still there, or I thought it was. When I unzipped it, the jacket was missing. In its place hung one of Tom's old civilian blazers, navy, moth-eaten near the cuff. My son had taken my jacket and my binder from my house. I called Evan. He answered on the fourth ring. "Mom, I'm in the middle of dinner. Bring back my service binder and my jacket." Silence. Then softly, "I don't know what you're talking about." That lie broke something cleanly. Not loudly, cleanly. "Evan, maybe you misplaced them." "I did not misplace a uniform jacket in a garment bag." He sighed. In the background, I heard restaurant noise. Glasses, low music, Claire's voice. "This is exactly what I'm worried about," he said. The eggs in the grocery bag shifted and one cracked against the carton. "My locks will be changed tomorrow," I said. "Mom, don't be dramatic. Bring back what you took. I have to go." He hung up. I did not call back. I called Marion. She answered, even though it was after 8. I told her everything. "Do you have copies?" she asked. "Some, not the certified packet." "Listen carefully. Tomorrow morning, request a replacement copy of your DD 214 through the County Veterans Service Office and the appropriate records channels. Call the Air Force Personnel Center. Contact anyone who served with you and can verify the jacket. Save every text. Do not accuse him in writing. Ask once for the return of specific property. Then stop." I should have changed the locks. "Yes," she said, "and tomorrow you will. Tonight you will breathe." I don't feel like breathing. That is not a requirement for doing it. I almost laughed. It came out as a sob. After we hung up, I walked into the den and looked at Tom's wall. His flight helmet sat under glass. His photograph smiled from a world where our son had not yet learned to weaponize grief. I sat in Tom's leather chair, the one that still held the shape of him, and spoke into the quiet. I tried to handle it gently. The house did not answer, but the next morning, I stopped being gentle with facts. At 8:03 a.m., I was waiting outside the County Veterans Service Office. The man who opened the door was named Roy Pritchard, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant with a white mustache and a limp he treated as a minor inconvenience. "You're early," he said. "I'm motivated." He grunted. "Best kind of early." I explained what I needed: replacement records, certified copies if possible, proof of rank, awards, service dates, retirement status. Roy listened without interrupting. When I finished, his face had gone hard in that quiet way older veterans have when someone disrespects a service record. "Family?" he asked. "My son." He exhaled through his nose. "That's a hard road." Yes. He did not pity me. I appreciated that. For 3 hours, Roy helped me file requests, contact offices, print forms, and identify documents I had forgotten existed. He also called a woman named Denise Alvarez, who had served with me during an aeromedical evacuation rotation years earlier and now worked with a Veterans Council in Atlanta. "Helen Whitaker?" Denise said when Roy put her on speaker. "I'd know that name in a burning building." I smiled for the first time that morning. Denise remembered the mission that had earned my citation. She remembered the young staff sergeant with shrapnel injuries, the equipment failure, the storm delay, the way I held pressure on a wound for so long my fingers cramped. She remembered Tom visiting the hospital later and joking that I had saved more pilots than he had flown. "Do you need a statement?" she asked. "Yes," Roy said before I could answer. "You'll have it today." When I left Roy's office, I had a checklist, 3 contacts, and something I had not felt in weeks: direction. At noon, the locksmith changed every lock on my house. At 1, I texted Evan exactly as Marion instructed. "Evan, my Air Force dress blue jacket and service binder were removed from my home without permission. Please return both items to my front porch by 6 p.m. today." He replied 20 minutes later. "Mom, I'm worried about you. I don't have anything of yours. Please stop making accusations." There it was in writing. I sent the screenshot to Marion. She replied with 2 words: "Save everything." By the end of the week, the first replacement records arrived electronically. My retirement orders, my record of service, my award citation, copies of performance reports signed by commanders whose names Evan would not recognize because he had never cared to learn them. Denise sent her statement, notarized. Roy found a copy of a photograph from a 2005-based newspaper showing me standing beside an evacuation aircraft with 3 other medical officers. My name and rank appeared in the caption. Each document felt like a brick removed from my chest. Then came the second theft. Not from my house. From the story. The Veterans Day dinner program was emailed to donors for preview. A friend from church forwarded it to me with the message, "Helen, did you approve this?" I opened the attachment. The cover showed Tom's portrait. Inside was a schedule, donor list, scholarship mission, and a page titled Family Reflections. Evan had written a tribute to his father. It was polished and emotional. It described Tom as a man of courage, discipline, and service. Then came the paragraph about me. In his final months, Dad worried about Mom. Grief and age can blur the past, and as a family, we have chosen to protect her from the stress of public responsibilities. We ask our community to honor Thomas Whitaker's true service legacy with compassion and discretion. Compassion and discretion. That was the sentence that told me Evan was not afraid I would embarrass the family. He was afraid I would correct it. I printed the program and drove straight to Marian's office. She read it once, then again. This is useful. Useful? He put the false narrative in writing. My throat tightened. He made me sound unstable. Yes, she said. And now we can show intent. I sat back, suddenly exhausted. Marian tapped the paper. Helen, I need to ask you something plainly. Do you want to stop the dinner? I pictured Tom's portrait, the scholarship recipients, Lily in a dress, veterans at round tables, flags along the wall. I pictured Evan smiling at a microphone with my jacket hidden somewhere nearby. I pictured the town accepting his version because it was easier than asking questions. No, I said. Marian watched me. I want the dinner to happen. Why? Because he chose the room. A small smile touched her face. Then we prepare for the room. Preparation is not as dramatic as anger, but it is far more useful. Over the next 10 days, Marian, Roy, Denise, and I built an evidence ladder. We did not call it that, but that is what it was. First, the public materials showing how Evan had minimized me. Then the texts showing he framed my objections as confusion. Then the property issue, my jacket and binder removed without permission. Then the replacement official records. Then witness statements. Then the scholarship documents showing Evan had attempted to create a board structure without my voting authority despite using marital and family items as the emotional center of the campaign. Finally, there was the cassette. I did not know about it until the Saturday before Veterans Day. Roy came to my house to look at the den display and help me identify any missing items. He was careful, almost reverent, around Tom's things. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, reading plaques, studying photographs, saying very little. When he reached the glass case with Tom's flight helmet, he frowned. This been moved? I don't think so. He pointed to the lower shelf. Dust line says something sat there. I looked. He was right. A rectangle in the dust, about the size of a small case. My stomach turned. I don't know what that was. We searched the cabinet below. Nothing. Then Roy asked whether Tom had kept a personal recorder. A memory surfaced so quickly it almost hurt. Tom had used a microcassette recorder during his illness. His fingers grew weak, and writing became difficult. So he recorded reminders, stories, messages for Lily, and thoughts he wanted Evan and me to have later. After he died, I put the recorder in the den because I could not bring myself to listen to all the tapes. I found the recorder in the bottom drawer of Tom's desk. The case was empty. Roy said nothing. He did not need to. I searched every drawer, every shelf, every box. Near midnight, I found one loose microcassette tucked inside an envelope behind Tom's old maintenance manuals. On the envelope, in Tom's shaky handwriting, were 3 words. For the dinner? I sat at the desk until my legs went numb. Tom had known, maybe not the whole shape of it, maybe not the theft, the program, the public accusation, but he had known enough about Evan's hunger for a clean, simple hero story. He had known enough about me to fear my silence. I found fresh batteries for the recorder. My hands shook so badly I had to try twice to fit them in. When I pressed play, static hissed. Then Tom's voice filled the den. It was weaker than I remembered and stronger than I could bear. Helen, if you're listening to this before the dinner, then I either worried too much or not enough. I covered my mouth. He coughed on the tape, then continued. I want them to honor service right. Not just mine, yours too. Evan always liked the parts of my story he could understand. Airplanes, medals, speeches, but he never understood what you carried because you carried it quietly. So I'm going to say this plain. The blue jacket with the silver oak leaves is yours. The air medal citation is yours. The photograph from Balad is yours. The service binder is yours. And if anyone uses my name to make you smaller, they are not honoring me. They are disobeying the last thing I asked of my family. I stopped the tape because I could not breathe. Roy stood near the doorway, his eyes wet. "Ma'am," he said softly, "that man loved you correctly." I played the tape 3 more times that night, not because I needed proof, but because grief sometimes asks to hear love in a voice it can no longer touch. The next morning, I called Marion. When I told her, she was silent for a long moment. "Can we use it?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "but carefully. We are not going to ambush a room like a television show. We are going to give the board and the post commander an opportunity to correct the record before your son does more damage." "Will they?" "That depends on whether they prefer comfort or truth." On Monday, Marion sent a formal letter to the Scholarship Planning Committee, the Veterans Hall Board, and Pastor Wilkes. It stated that the program contained false and defamatory implications regarding my mental state and military service. It requested correction before publication and demanded the return of my property. It included copies of my service verification, rank documentation, and a photograph of my dress blue jacket. Evan responded through email, copying half the committee. "Mom is grieving and lashing out. The jacket in question was found among Dad's military items, and we believe she has become confused about ownership. We will handle this privately after the event." Privately. A public lie always wants a private correction. The post commander, a man named Carl Blevins, called me that evening. He sounded uncomfortable. "Helen, I'm hoping we can keep this from overshadowing Tom's night." "Commander Blevins," I said, "with respect, Tom's night is already being overshadowed by a lie. I saw the documents." "Then you know my rank." "Yes." "And my service?" "Yes." "And that the jacket Evan plans to display is mine?" He paused. "I haven't seen the jacket." "You have seen the documentation." Another pause. He sighed. "Helen, Evan says emotions are high. Facts are not emotions." He had no answer. I wanted him to be brave. I wanted someone in authority to stand up before the dinner and say, "We will not allow this." But many good people are brave only after the cost of silence becomes higher than the cost of speaking. By Veterans Day morning, no correction had been issued. I woke before sunrise. For a while, I lay in bed listening to the house. The new locks clicked softly when the wind moved the front door. Somewhere outside, a truck passed on the road. Tom's side of the bed was still empty, though after 7 months I had stopped reaching for him in my sleep. I made coffee in the blue enamel pot. I ironed a dark navy dress. I pinned a small silver oak leaf brooch to my lapel, not because anyone would understand it, but because I did. I placed the replacement certified records into a manila envelope. I placed Tom's microcassette in a small plastic case and wrapped it in a handkerchief. I put Lily's drawing in the side pocket of my purse. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote one sentence on a yellow sticky note. "Accusation has to finish speaking before evidence can answer." I do not know why I wrote it. Maybe because I needed to remind myself that discipline is not passivity. Maybe because part of me still wanted to stand up at the first insult and reclaim the room with anger. But anger would have made Evan's story easier. Confused, emotional, unstable. I had spent a career learning that timing matters. That night, timing would matter more than volume. At 5:30 p.m., Marion picked me up. Roy was in the passenger seat wearing a dark suit and his Marine Corps lapel pin. Denise planned to meet us at the hall. The living witness, the retired master sergeant, was a man named Paul Ransom. He had been the injured staff sergeant on the mission from my citation. I had not seen him in nearly 18 years. He was driving in from Columbus with his wife. "You ready?" Marion asked. "No." Roy turned around and looked at me. "Good. Ready is overrated. Prepared is better." I smiled despite myself. The county veterans hall had been decorated with small American flags, white tablecloths, and framed photographs of local service members. A brass bell sat near the stage. The room smelled of coffee, floor wax, roast chicken, and old wool coats. There were round tables for donors, veterans, church families, and scholarship applicants. A long table near the front held Tom's portrait, his folded flag, a pair of flight gloves, and my dress blue jacket on a mannequin. My jacket. For a moment, the room narrowed until all I could see was the silver oak leaf on the shoulder catching the light. Evan had not even removed my name tag. Whitaker. He had placed my own name in front of the room and still planned to say it was confusion. Claire saw me first. Her smile flickered, then returned. "Helen," she said, crossing the room. "You made it." "I was invited." "Of course." She looked behind me at Marion and Roy. "And you brought friends." "Witnesses," Roy said. Claire's face tightened. Evan appeared near the stage wearing a dark suit and Tom's old tie. That tie hit me harder than I expected. It was navy with tiny silver aircraft, a gift I had bought Tom for our 25th anniversary. Evan had no right to wear it as armor. Mom, he said, keeping his voice low, please don't do this tonight. Do what? Make a scene. I looked at my jacket on the mannequin. I did not bring the scene, Evan. His eyes hardened for 1 second. Then he remembered the room and softened his face. Lily is here, he whispered. I know. Then think about her. I've been thinking about her for months. He looked past me at Marian. This is a family event. No, Marian said calmly. It is a public charitable event using public claims, donated funds, and military service representations. You made it more than family when you printed the program. Evan's jaw shifted. Claire touched his arm. Let's not do this in the doorway, she said. I almost admired her composure. Almost. At 6:40, dinner began. Marianne and Roy sat with me at the back table near the kitchen doors because my original place card, the one at the family table, had been replaced. The new card simply read Mrs. Helen Whitaker. No title, no rank, no relation to the board. Just a widow placed close enough to be visible and far enough to be managed. Paul Ransom arrived 10 minutes later. I knew him before he said his name, not by his face, which had aged like mine, but by the way he looked at me. Some gratitude has a posture. He approached our table slowly with a cane in his right hand. His wife stood beside him. Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker, he said. I stood too quickly. Paul, he smiled. I figured I owed you one dinner. I took his hand. His grip was warm. For a second, I was not in the Veterans Hall. I was in a vibrating aircraft with noise pressing against my skull, holding pressure on a wound, telling a young man to stay with me while his blood soaked through gauze. You don't owe me anything, I said. Yes, ma'am, he answered. I do. 2 donors at the next table looked over. I saw the first crack then. Not in Evan, in the room. A title had been spoken clearly by a man with a cane and a service pin. Lieutenant Colonel. People heard it. The program began at 7. Pastor Wilkes gave an invocation. The mayor welcomed everyone. Commander Blevins spoke about Veterans Day and the obligation of memory. His eyes came to my table once, then moved away. Cowardice often wears a solemn face. Evan took the stage at 7:12. He looked exactly as he had looked in my imagination. Polished, grateful, burdened. A good son carrying a heavy responsibility. He thanked donors, veterans, the church, the scholarship committee, and his father's memory. He spoke beautifully about Tom. I will not pretend otherwise. Some of his words were true, and that made the lie worse. Then he turned toward my jacket. As many of you know, he said, families often struggle after losing someone like my father. Grief can blur objects, memories, even identities. Marianne's hand stilled beside her water glass. Evan continued, in recent months, my mother has had difficulty separating some of Dad's service items from her own keepsakes. A low discomfort moved through the room. He lifted my jacket from the mannequin. This jacket was found among my father's military effects. My mother believes it belongs to her. My heart did not race. That surprised me. It became very slow, very steady. Evan looked at the audience with rehearsed sadness. We are not here to shame her. We are here to protect her dignity and preserve Dad's true legacy. Then came the sentence. Tonight, I ask you to honor real sacrifice, not confusion. The room went still. Lily's face turned toward me. She looked frightened. Not of me, but for me. That almost broke my discipline. Almost. I stayed seated. Evan had not learned the lesson every nurse learns early. Some wounds must be fully exposed before they can be cleaned. Commander Blevins shifted in his chair. The mayor looked down at the program. Pastor Wilkes closed his eyes briefly, as if prayer could excuse silence. Marian stood. She did not raise her voice. Mr. Whitaker, before this public representation continues, Mrs. Whitaker requests that the record be corrected. Evan blinked. He had expected anger from me. He had not prepared for procedure. Who are you? He asked. Marian Brooks, counsel for Lieutenant Colonel Helen Whitaker, United States Air Force Reserve, retired. There are moments when a room hears a fact and does not yet know what to do with it. That was one of them. Whispers moved like wind through dry leaves. Evan forced a laugh. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Mom, please. I stood then. Not quickly, not dramatically. I stood the way I had stood for inspections, promotions, retirement, and too many hospital corridors where families waited for news. Evan, I said, put my jacket down. He stared at me. I repeated it. Put my jacket down. Something in my voice reached a part of him older than his ambition. He lowered the jacket onto the table. Marianne walked to the stage with a manila envelope. Commander Blevins rose halfway, unsure whether to stop her or help her. Roy stood too. Denise stood from a side table. Paul Ransom pushed himself upright with his cane. The room understood then that this was not an emotional outburst. This was formation. Marion faced the audience. The document I'm holding is a certified copy of Lieutenant Colonel Helen Whitaker's record of service, including retirement orders, rank verification, and award citation. Copies were provided to the event committee before tonight. No correction was made. Commander Blevins looked as if someone had struck him without touching him. Evans stepped toward the microphone. Those documents don't prove that jacket. Roy's voice cut through the room. The name tag proves the jacket. People looked at the jacket. Whitaker. Evans said, that was Dad's last name too. Roy walked forward. Slow but steady. The rank insignia is a silver oak leaf. Lieutenant Colonel. Your father was not a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Nurse Corps. A few veterans in the room murmured. Someone said, that's right. Denise stepped beside Roy. The ribbon rack is consistent with her record. The Air Medal citation matches the ribbon displayed. The tailoring label has her initials. Evan's face flushed. You people don't understand. My mother has been mixing stories since my father died. That was when Paul Ransom spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried, I understand exactly who your mother is. Every head turned. Paul made his way toward the stage. His wife followed close, one hand near his elbow, though she did not touch him unless he asked. He stopped beside the jacket and looked at me. I was Staff Sergeant Paul Ransom, he said. On a medical evacuation flight in 2005, Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker kept me alive long enough to get me to surgical care. She talked to me for 47 minutes because I kept trying to go to sleep. She told me about her son, Evan, who liked baseball, and her husband, Tom, who flew helicopters and made terrible coffee. A broken laugh moved through the room. Mine nearly joined it. Paul turned to Evan. Your mother did not borrow courage from your father. She had her own. Evan looked smaller then. Not sorry. Not yet. Just smaller. Claire stood at the front table. This is inappropriate, she said. This night is supposed to honor Tom. I looked at her. It will. Marion opened the small plastic case and held up the microcassette. Evan's face changed. It was quick, but I saw it. Recognition. Fear. He knew the recorder was missing. He knew he had taken some tapes. Or perhaps he had thrown them out. But he had not known about this one. Marion addressed Commander Blevins. With the permission of Mrs. Whitaker, we request that Mr. Thomas Whitaker be allowed to speak for himself. The commander looked at me. His shame was visible now. So was his choice. He stepped to the microphone. Play it. Roy brought the small recorder to the sound table. There was a brief squeal, then static. Then Tom's voice filled the hall. Helen, if you're listening to this before the dinner, then I either worried too much or not enough. The sound of my dead husband's voice changed the air. People leaned back as if the past itself had entered the room and taken a seat. Tom coughed on the tape. I want them to honor service right, not just mine. Yours too. Evan always liked the parts of my story he could understand. Airplanes, medals, speeches. But he never understood what you carried because you carried it quietly. So I'm going to say this plain. The blue jacket with the silver oak leaves is yours. The Air Medal citation is yours. The photograph from Balad is yours. The service binder is yours. And if anyone uses my name to make you smaller, they are not honoring me. They are disobeying the last thing I asked of my family. No one moved. The cassette clicked softly as it continued. Evan, if you are hearing this, listen to your mother. Not because she is grieving, because she is right. A man's legacy is not protected by stealing a woman's truth. Then static. Then the tape stopped. There are silences that hide things, and there are silences that reveal them. That one revealed everything. Evan stood beside the microphone with his mouth slightly open. Claire lowered herself into a chair as if her knees had forgotten their duty. Pastor Wilkes wiped his eyes. Commander Blevins stared at the floor. Lily was crying. That was the only part I regretted. Not the truth. Never the truth. But that a child had to watch adults make it necessary. I stepped away from my table and walked toward the front. No one stopped me. I picked up my jacket and held it against my arm. The wool felt heavier than I remembered. Then I faced the room. I did not come here to take honor from my husband, I said. Tom Whitaker earned every word of respect spoken tonight. He was brave, he was good, he was loved. But I will not let love for him become permission to lie about me. My voice shook once. I let it. I served 28 years. I retired as a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserve Nurse Corps. I was a nurse, an officer, a wife, a mother, and now a widow. None of those titles cancels the others. A woman near the back began to cry quietly. I looked at Evan. My son removed my service binder and this jacket from my home without permission. He allowed people to believe I was confused rather than admit I objected to being erased. He did this publicly, so the correction must also be public. Evan whispered. Mom, not apology, appeal. I did not answer him. Commander Blevins stepped to the microphone. His face was pale. Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker, he said, and his voice broke slightly on my rank. On behalf of this post, I apologize. We had documentation before tonight, and we failed to act with the courage we ask veterans to show. The record stands corrected. He turned to the room. The jacket displayed here belongs to Lieutenant Colonel Helen Whitaker, United States Air Force Reserve Nurse Corps, retired. Her service is documented, her rank is documented, her award is documented. And this hall recognizes that truth. People stood slowly at first, then all at once. I wish I could say the applause felt triumphant. It did not. It felt like rain after a drought. Necessary, late. Not enough to undo the damage, but enough to let something living breathe again. Paul saluted me. I returned it. That was when Evan finally understood the room had turned. Not against him in hatred, but away from the story he had built. The donors who had smiled at him all evening now watched him with careful distance. The reporters near the back were writing. The mayor spoke quietly to an aide. Claire stared at the tablecloth. Lily slipped out of her chair and ran to me. For 1 second, Claire reached as if to stop her. Then she let her go. Lily wrapped her arms around my waist and sobbed into my dress. I knew it was yours, she whispered. I knew because of the drawing. I held her with one arm, my jacket over the other. I know, sweetheart. I tried to tell Daddy. I closed my eyes. Of all the evidence in that room, the one that hurt most was a child, saying she had tried to tell the truth and no one listened. The dinner did not continue as planned. It limped forward because public events have a strange momentum. The scholarship recipients were introduced. Checks were awarded. Photos were taken, though fewer than Evan had hoped. Commander Blevins insisted I stand in the official photograph beside Tom's portrait. I did, but I kept Lily's hand in mine. Evan did not return to the microphone. Claire tried once to approach me near the hallway. Helen, she said, her face tight, you have to understand we were trying to protect the foundation. I looked at her. From what? She opened her mouth, then closed it. From the truth? I asked. Her eyes filled, but the tears felt more like frustration than remorse. You embarrassed us. No, I said. You arranged a public lie. I brought witnesses. She had no answer for that. After the event, Marion, Roy, Denise, Paul, and I gathered near the back doors. People came by in small groups. Some apologized, some thanked me, some said they had always wondered. That phrase, always wondered, taught me something about people. Many see the crack before the wall falls. Few warn the person standing beneath it. Pastor Wilkes approached last. His eyes were red. Helen, I failed you. I appreciated that he did not begin with if. Yes, I said. He swallowed. I should have asked you directly. Yes. I accepted concern as truth because it was easier. That was an apology I could respect. Specific, uncomfortable, unadorned. I forgive you, I said, but I will need time before I trust your judgment with my name again. He nodded. That is fair. Forgiveness is sometimes a door. Trust is a house. And houses take longer to rebuild. Evan waited for me outside under the portico. The night was cold. Flags along the walkway snapped in the wind. He had removed Tom's tie and held it in one hand. Mom, he said. Marion paused beside me, but I touched her arm. It's all right. She stepped away, close enough to see, far enough to give me the dignity of handling my own son. Evan looked terrible, not because he had suffered enough, because consequences had finally reached him. I didn't think it would go that far, he said. That was not an apology. It was a confession of poor calculation. I waited. He tried again. I was trying to keep Dad's story clean. There was nothing dirty about my service. He flinched. I know. Do you? His eyes filled. I know now. No, Evan. You knew before. You chose otherwise. The wind moved between us. He looked down at Tom's tie. Claire said donors like simple stories. And you liked being the man who controlled one. He did not deny it. For the first time that night, I saw something like the boy he had been, ashamed, cornered, wanting his mother to make the feeling stop. Every mother knows that temptation, to soften the consequence, to say, it's all right even when it is not, to rescue the child from the pain of seeing himself clearly. But Evan was not a child. And I was tired of paying for his comfort with my dignity. You will return my service binder, I said. He nodded quickly. I have it. You will resign from any leadership role in the scholarship until an independent board is appointed. His eyes widened. Mom, you used your father's name to solicit public trust while lying about your mother's service. If the scholarship is to survive, it cannot be under your control. He rubbed both hands over his face. And you will tell Lily the truth, I said. Not the soft version, not the donor version, the truth. That you took something that did not belong to you and called your mother confused to avoid accountability. His voice cracked. She'll hate me. No, I said. She may be disappointed in you. That is not the same thing. Learn the difference before you teach her to fear honesty. He cried then, quietly. I had not seen my son cry since he was 12 years old and broke his wrist falling out of Tom's old pickup. Part of me wanted to hold him. I did not. Boundaries do not mean love has disappeared. Sometimes they mean love has finally stopped lying. The next week was uglier than the public applause suggested. People like clean endings. Real correction is paperwork, meetings, legal letters, and conversations that make everyone sweat. The scholarship committee held an emergency session. Marion attended as my counsel. Commander Blevins requested that the Veterans Hall be removed from all promotional material until governance was corrected. 2 donors suspended pledges pending review. The mayor's office asked for documentation of charitable status. Claire resigned first, calling the process hostile. Evan resigned 2 days later after Roy submitted a written complaint regarding misrepresentation of military property and service records at a veterans event. I did not press criminal charges for the jacket and binder after Evan returned them, but Marion made sure the return was documented. The binder arrived on my porch in a cardboard box with no note. 3 tabs were bent. 1 plastic sleeve was torn. The sticky note from Tom was still inside. Don't let them turn you into my shadow. I pressed it flat with my palm and placed it in a new protective sleeve. The microcassette went into a small fireproof lockbox along with the certified record copies. My jacket returned to the cedar closet, but not to hiding. Roy helped me mount a proper display case in the den. Not grand, not flashy, just accurate. My jacket on one side, Tom's on the other. Between them, Lily's drawing. Grandpa and Grandma fly helping people. Children sometimes understand what adults complicate for profit. 2 Sundays after Veterans Day, I went back to First Baptist. I was not sure I wanted to. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel, watching families walk through the glass doors. Church had always been a place where I felt known. Now I wondered whether being known had only meant being convenient. Pastor Wilkes met me near the entrance. I'm glad you came, he said. I almost didn't. I would have understood. That helped. Inside, several people greeted me as Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker. A few overdid it, saying the title too loudly, as if volume could make up for months of silence. I let them. Correction is awkward before it becomes normal. After the service, an older woman named Mrs. Henson approached me near the hymnals. She had known Tom for 30 years and had once brought soup when I had pneumonia. Helen, she said, I need to tell you something. I saw the website months ago and it bothered me. I thought about calling you. But you didn't. No. Her eyes filled. I told myself it was family business. I looked at her carefully. It became family business because people outside the family helped make the lie comfortable. She nodded. You're right. I did not hug her. I did not punish her. I simply let the truth sit between us without rushing to make it easier. That was new for me. For years, I had been the woman who smoothed tablecloths after arguments, laughed off insults, accepted partial apologies, and translated disrespect into stress so other people could keep feeling decent. I had mistaken peacekeeping for peace. They are not the same. Peace built on silence always sends the bill to the person who swallowed the truth. Lily came to see me the following Saturday. Evan brought her but did not come inside. He stood on the porch looking at the new lock, then at me. I told her. He said, How much? He swallowed. All of it. Lily stood beside him with a backpack and red eyes. I'm angry at him, she announced. Evan looked wounded, but he did not correct her. That's allowed, I said. I still love him. That's allowed too. She stepped inside. Evan remained on the porch. Mom, he said, I'm in counseling. I'm glad. I don't expect that to fix it. It won't fix what happened. I know. But he was starting to know in a different way. Not the way a man knows because he has been caught. The way a man knows because he has finally sat alone with what catching revealed. That mattered. It did not erase anything. Lily and I spent the afternoon baking apple bread. She was 13, tall for her age, with Tom's careful hands and my stubborn chin. She asked questions while peeling apples. Were you scared when you were deployed? Yes. Did you save a lot of people? I helped a lot of people. Saving is usually a team word. Did Grandpa know? I smiled. Grandpa knew more than anybody. She nodded, thinking, Dad said he wanted Grandpa to be the hero. Your grandfather was a hero to many people. But you were too. I placed the knife down carefully. Lily, hero is a word people use after the hard part is over. In the moment, you are usually just doing the next right thing. She considered that. Like Mr. Ransom standing up? Yes. Like you not yelling? I laughed softly. That was training and age. She smiled for the first time all day. After the bread went into the oven, I showed her the service binder. Not all of it. 13-year-olds do not need every detail of war, blood, and bureaucracy. But I showed her my orders, my retirement photograph, the award citation, and a picture of Tom and me standing side by side in uniform at a base chapel years ago. She touched the edge of the photograph. You look younger. I was. You look serious. I usually was. Grandpa looks proud. He was. She looked up. Were you proud of him? Every day. Even when people forgot you? That question landed deep. Yes, I said. Love is not the reason people erased me. Their smallness was. She leaned against my shoulder. We sat like that until the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and apples. By December, the scholarship had been reorganized under an independent board made up of 2 veterans, 1 teacher, 1 accountant, a Gold Star mother from the next county, and me. I did not serve as president. I did not need to. I served as records chair, which made Roy laugh for nearly a minute. Perfect, he said. Put the woman with the binder in charge of the records. The revised website told the truth. Tom's biography remained front and center because the scholarship bore his name. But a new paragraph explained that the foundation honored the service values shared by Thomas and Helen Whitaker, including military aviation, medical service, family resilience, and care for those who serve. My rank was correct. My branch was correct. The jacket photograph was labeled correctly. The first corrected donor letter began, Dear friends of the Whitaker Service Legacy. I read that phrase 3 times. Not Tom's alone, not mine alone, ours. Some people accused me of making too much of it. They did not say it to my face, but small towns are not built for secrets. I heard that I should have handled things privately. I heard that grief made everyone act badly. I heard that a mother should not embarrass her son in public. Maybe some of those people meant well. But people who advise private correction after public harm are often asking the wounded person to protect the reputation of the person who swung the blade. I did not answer every whisper. I had learned that not every courtroom has walls, and not every witness deserves your energy. Evan spent Christmas Eve with Claire's parents that year. Lily came to my house for Christmas morning. Evan asked if he could stop by for coffee after lunch. I said yes, for 1 hour. When he arrived, he carried no gifts. I respected that. Gifts would have felt like a shortcut. He stood in the den for a long time looking at the display case. My jacket, Tom's jacket, Lily's drawing, the corrected scholarship letter framed below. I hated this room when I was a kid, he said. That surprised me. Why? He shoved his hands into his coat pockets. It felt like both of you had a life bigger than me. I sat in Tom's old chair. We did have a life bigger than you. That doesn't mean we loved you less. I know that now. I did not say anything. He continued. Dad's stories were easier. Helicopters, missions, funny things. Yours were harder. Hospitals, injured people. You came home quiet. Sometimes I thought you were mad at us. I was tired. I know. Do you? He looked at me then. I'm trying to. That was the most honest thing he had said in months. He did not ask to be forgiven. Instead, he apologized. Specifically, he apologized for taking the jacket, for taking the binder, for letting Claire call me confused, for writing the program, for using Tom's name to make people doubt me, for making Lily watch the truth come out that way. I listened to every word. When he finished, he looked like a man waiting for a sentence. I forgive you, I said. His eyes filled. But you cannot have a key to my house. He nodded quickly. I understand. And you cannot speak for my service. Ever. I understand. And I will not manage your shame for you. That one hurt him. I saw it. But he nodded. Before he left, he touched the edge of Tom's jacket display. Dad would be ashamed of me. Yes, I said. He closed his eyes, and he would still love you, I added. Evan cried then. Not loudly, not for effect. Just enough for me to see the boy and the man standing in the same place, both responsible for what came next. That was the beginning of repair, not the end of it. Claire and Evan separated in February. I will not pretend I was surprised. Their marriage had been built on appearances long before Veterans Day. Claire sent me one email after she moved out. It was not an apology. It was a defense with soft edges. She wrote that she had been under pressure, that donors expected a certain narrative, that she never intended to hurt me. I did not respond immediately. A week later, I wrote back 3 sentences. Intent does not erase impact. You helped turn my grief into a public diagnosis. I hope you learn to tell the truth before it becomes expensive. I never heard from her again. Spring came slowly that year. The azaleas bloomed along the side fence. The orange cat returned to sleep under the hydrangeas. At the VA clinic, veterans still came in with forms folded into shirt pockets and questions they pretended were simple. A 90-year-old Korean War veteran named Mr. Bell brought me peppermint candies every Tuesday because he said nurses ran better on sugar. A young woman from the county office asked if I would speak at a women veterans luncheon in March. My first instinct was to say no. Old habits? Then I thought of Lily watching from the front table. I thought of Tom's cassette. I thought of my jacket held up as evidence against me by someone who had never bothered to read the name tag. I said yes. The luncheon was held in a library meeting room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs. Nothing grand. No reporters, no mayor. Just women of different ages sitting around tables with paper cups of coffee and plates of cookies. Some wore ball caps with unit patches. Some wore church clothes. Some looked like they had never told their own families half of what they carried. I spoke for 12 minutes. I told them that records matter, that photographs matter, that names matter, that no one should have to become loud to be believed, but quiet people should still keep copies. They laughed at that. Then I told them something I had learned the hard way. Do not wait until someone else is holding your jacket to decide your story deserves a label. Afterward, a woman in her 70s approached me. She had served in the Navy during Vietnam, stateside, processing casualty communications. Her hands trembled around her coffee cup. My children think I was a secretary, she said. I heard what she meant. Were you? I typed the names of dead boys before their mothers knew. We stood there together in the library meeting room, 2 old women with coffee going cold between us, honoring a kind of service nobody puts on recruiting posters. Tell them, I said. She nodded. I think I will. By the next Veterans Day, the scholarship dinner returned to the same hall. I almost asked to move it somewhere else, but Commander Blevins requested a meeting months ahead of time. He came to my house wearing a suit and carrying a folder. I'd like to do this correctly, he said. That would be refreshing. He winced, then smiled. Fair. He showed me the draft program. Every name, rank, and title had been verified. The board approved a new policy requiring service documentation before any military item could be publicly displayed. He also added a section honoring military spouses who served in their own right, not only as supporters. I should have done this before, he said. Yes. I was afraid of creating conflict. You didn't avoid conflict. You chose the person who would carry it. He absorbed that, I know. That year, my place card was at the front table. It read, Lieutenant Colonel Helen Whitaker, USAF Reserve, retired. Beside it was a second-place card for Lily. She had insisted on coming. Evan came too. Not as speaker, not as organizer, just as Lily's father and Tom's son. He wore a plain navy suit and no borrowed tie. Before the dinner began, he approached me. I can leave if it's uncomfortable, he said. It is uncomfortable. He nodded. But you can stay. His eyes filled with gratitude he did not try to spend. That mattered. The program opened with the presentation of colors. Then Commander Blevins stepped to the microphone. 1 year ago, he said, this hall failed to protect the truth quickly enough. Tonight we begin by correcting not only a record, but a habit. Service is not always loud. It is not always male. It is not always the story a family finds easiest to tell. He turned toward me. Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker, would you join me? My knees reminded me of my age as I stood. My spine remembered rank. The room rose. This time, the applause did not feel like rain after drought. It felt like a door opening in a house that had finally been repaired. I walked to the stage. Commander Blevins handed me the microphone. I looked at Tom's portrait, then at Lily, then at Evan. My son was crying quietly, but he did not look away. I used to believe dignity meant staying silent long enough for others to do the right thing, I said. Sometimes it does. Sometimes restraint gives people room to choose well. But silence is not a duty you owe to someone else's lie. The room was still. My husband was worthy of honor. So was I. So are many people whose service has been simplified, softened, or erased because the full truth was inconvenient. Tonight, we award scholarships in Tom's name. We also commit ourselves to a larger truth. Respect should begin at home before the world is asked to applaud it. I handed the microphone back. That was all. No long speech. No victory lap. No cruelty. After the dinner, Lily and I stood beside the display table. This time the table held Tom's flight gloves, my service binder, a copy of the corrected scholarship charter, and a photograph of the two of us in uniform. Not everything needed to be shown. Just enough to tell the truth. A little boy pointed at my jacket in the photograph and asked his mother, "Was she a soldier too?" His mother answered, "Yes, she was." Lily smiled up at me. On the way home, she asked if we could stop for ice cream, even though it was cold outside. Tom had always believed ice cream tasted better in winter because it had something to prove. So we stopped at a small place near the square and ate vanilla sundaes in the car with the heater running. Lily looked at me with whipped cream on her sleeve and said, "Grandma, do you miss being in uniform?" I thought about that. "I miss parts of it," I said. "I miss the people. I miss being useful in a way everyone understood." "You're still useful." I smiled. "Thank you." She looked out the windshield at the courthouse lights. "I think Dad is getting better." "I hope so. Do you trust him?" I watched a couple cross the street hand in hand, their breath white in the cold air. "Not the way I used to." She nodded slowly. "But I love him," I said, "and I believe people can repair what they are willing to name." She leaned her head on my shoulder. At home, I hung my coat in the hall and walked into the den. The display case glowed softly under the small picture light Roy had installed. Tom's jacket on the left, mine on the right. Lily's drawing in the middle. Below it, in a small frame, was the yellow sticky note I had written on Veterans Day morning. "Accusation has to finish speaking before evidence can answer." I stood there for a long time. The photograph did not give me my service. The record did not create my rank. The applause did not make me worthy, and my son's apology did not return the months he had taken. I had been who I was before the room knew it. I had been who I was while they doubted it. I had been who I was when I sat near the kitchen doors with my purse in my lap, waiting for truth to have its turn. But sometimes the world does need witnesses. Not because truth is weak, but because lies are social creatures. They gather friends, they borrow microphones, they print programs, they ask good people to stay quiet for the sake of peace. That night, as the house settled around me and the old floorboards creaked in the cold, I finally understood what Tom had tried to leave me. Not just a cassette, not just a defense. Permission. Permission to stand without becoming cruel. Permission to correct without begging. Permission to love my son without handing him the pen to my story again. Respect should not have required a raised seal, a witness, a cassette, and a room full of people. But once the truth had witnesses, no one could make me small again.